You don't squat heavy enough to be elite. We're gonna go into exactly what you need, what squat formula that you need to figure out if you can be an elite weightlifter, and we're gonna start right now. So when we're looking at weightlifters, the first thing that I like to do when I get a new weightlifter who walks in the door is look at that athlete and say, okay, is this person going to be a puller, meaning they're very good at doing a snatch pull or a clean pull, or are they gonna be a squatter? So somebody who just looks absolutely perfect when they hit that back squat, okay? Or even when they hit that big front squat. And one easy concept that you can use is if you just look at someone like Piros Dimas, one of the top 3 greatest weightlifters of all time. His legs are very, very short. His torso tends to be longer. So if you analyze someone like Piros as they would walk into your gym, the first thing that you could think is, okay, this individual is more predisposed from their body makeup to be a squatter. The second thing that you can do is then look at somebody who has longer legs and say, okay, this individual is more predisposed to be a puller. And what I like to do is take that step back and say, okay, if somebody's a squatter, when we're doing pull-based exercises, okay, so if I'm doing something like an RDL here, I know that squatters, when they're doing pulling-based exercises, might have a little bit bigger issues with their lower back because they tend to struggle with that pull through their posterior chain. They're very quad dominant individuals. Now, a puller, on the other hand, when they're squatting, they tend to have issues with their knees because they tend to be a little bit more mobile. They'll collapse in the bottom when they're squatting, so we have to be aware of that. But what does this do for us as we're building out a program? We've got to think through, is there a specific formula that we can use? How can we diagnose this through tests or through training? And then what can we do as we build out something long-term? So my first aspect that I like to do is focus on programming. So if I have an individual who does a power snatch and they do a power snatch at 92, 93% of their full snatch, right there, that's a red flag. They're likely pullers. And if I see somebody else who tends to front squat well past their best clean and jerk, they tend to be squatters, okay? So that's the first thing that pops into my head. And when I'm building out a 16 to 20 week program, and this is what we do inside of our Peak Strength Olympic weightlifting program, the first thing that we do is say, all right, if we take in this inventory, where are your squats, where are your pulls, where are your main lifts, and then we can build out that first 2 programs. So we're looking at the exposure phase and the comprehension phase. So inside of Peak Strength, if you tend to be a squatter, your first 2 programs will tend to be a bit more pull focused. If you tend to be a puller, that exposure phase and that comprehension phase will be a bit more squat focused. And the reason being is that we want to spend the first 8 weeks to try and build up that weakness as much as possible. Now, we have a specific formula that we use that I'm going to share with you guys shortly to identify if somebody is a squatter or if somebody is a puller. But as we build through that programming over 16 to 20 weeks, the next step that we want to do is, okay, 8 weeks, build up the weakness. Then that last 8 weeks leading into a peak, we really want to keep building up the athlete's strengths. So that's an easy example of how to look at your overall programming. But now I'm going to give you the exact formula that we use. So the first step that I like to do is just have our athletes train. Okay, so if they're doing simple training sessions, and just using that example from earlier, we can do power snatch to a full snatch. If somebody's hitting 90% of their full snatch at a power, they are very likely pulling based athletes. And that same individual would now go into a full snatch, and let's say that they can full snatch 145 kilos. And this is a direct example from one of our world-class lifters. They can snatch 145 kilos, but their best back squat ever is 210. So that's gonna push them where their snatch is almost 70% of their back squat. So this individual is a puller. Another unique thing that you can do is even look at clean to front squat ratio. So using that example, the best ever clean and jerk from that person in training was 170. He cleaned 177. He cleaned, let me repeat that, he cleaned 177. His best front squat was 190. So he was almost able to clean the same amount of his front squat. He was a puller. He could not have a huge squat. That's Jacob Horst, a multiple-time world team member for the United States. So if you just look at those numbers, that disparity, okay, if snatch is 70% of that back squat or close to 70%, they're gonna be pullers. Then you can look even more. If you're looking at the best clean and they're over 88, close to 90% of their best front squat, they're gonna be pullers. If we look on the other side, the other spectrum, we can see an individual who, let's say that they can snatch 88 to 90 kilos. So we've got a female here. If we have a snatch of 88 to 90 kilos and their best back squat is in excess of 155 kilos, now we're seeing this down below 60%. So they're at like 57 to 58% of their best back squat. Their squat is very, very strong. That's Haley Reichert, world bronze medalist. She's very, very strong with her squat. She is not as good of a puller. And if we look at the clean, she can clean 114 kilos. That's her best clean ever. Her best front squat is 135. There's a bit more of a disparity there. It's closer to 80%. It's about like 83 if I remember correctly based off of my head right now. So the closer that clean to front squat is to 80%, the more likely they are actual squatters. And then of course, you're gonna have people that live in that gray area, that middle ground. So one of the big factors that we did in designing Peak Strength was using specific formulas and algorithms to feed the program. We understand how we wanna develop weaknesses. We wanna understand how we can develop the strengths on the back end and really prioritize everything with accessories based around potential issues for a puller or for a squatter. But these are two specific formulas that are very easy to implement and really easy to understand. So one of the big factors here is that if you're a bad squatter, earlier in your training for the first 8 weeks, I recommend squatting at least 3 days a week. And that could be a back squat, a front squat, a back squat. It could even be up to 4 days a week. If you tend to be a bad puller, I actually recommend doing 3 to 4 sessions of pulling, and that could be multiple different variations around pulling, okay? Sometimes we'll do pulls to target, sometimes we'll do speed pulls, sometimes we do very heavy clean grip deadlifts. It depends on the situation and what that individual holds. And that's why I recommend heading over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store, the Apple iOS Store. Get in our weightlifting program today so that you can hit some monster PRs. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.